Darryl Horan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So you're running unopposed for the campaigns and engagement position. How's the campaign been so far?
So far, it's been relatively uncontroversial. People have been responding well to the campaign material, and I think by and large, people are happy with the campaign.
And how have you found campaigning online? Has it been difficult or easier in one way?
It's easier in the sense that, like, right now I'm also doing my thesis, so a lot of the time it's just like make a post, go back to writing thesis work. But in a normal year, I do enjoy the canvassing aspect of campaigns. I do it in terms of politics more nationally as well, and it's really nice to be able to like chat with people, see what their issues are, and then like bring them back into your campaign. So far, I've really only been able to do that with the nomination period, just like you're messaging people, hey, can I get a nomination? What are your big issues? They respond, and you go, okay, brilliant, thank you. I'll throw them in.
Yeah. We might get stuck into your manifesto anyway. So the first kind of key issue was fees for you, particularly the abolishment of fees. Do you think the campaign for students to have a fee reduction due to the pandemic, do you think that has sailed, and is that why abolishment of fees is your key issue?
So there is a the condition of COVID, it kind of presents the argument that higher education is a commodity, one that can be bought and sold, whereas we're saying it's a right, and therefore we want everyone to have access to it. So that's why there's a slight difference in tone.
Yeah. And you mentioned there of kind of working with student groups and activist groups to bring about the abolishment of free fees. Obviously included in that would be the Union of Students in Ireland. You've stated your preference to join the Union of Students in Ireland, but other candidates haven't. Do you think the Union of Students in Ireland is someone that we can work with both inside, or do you think we have to, or sorry, both outside, or do you think we have to be inside the organisation to kind of work with them?
So I know this is a fair point on USI's part, which is that, look, most colleges in Ireland or most student unions are paying their dues to be members. They can't really work with UCD when there's other colleges paying dues. And it might present the argument then, well, look, if UCD is getting to work with USI and not paying dues, why should, I don't know, Carlow IT pay dues? So for the most part, like the best way to do it is to work internally. Now you can build campaigns with them. It's just that like accessing their resources and working with them on a more formalized basis. I've no doubt they would prefer we do that internally.
Yeah. And given that so many of the candidates, even the presidential candidates themselves, are completely split on the issue, do you think there just isn't a consensus there that we will see a referendum anytime soon?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Like the truth is, USI haven't really been that noticeable on the scene this year. Like, I'm hard pressed to find a campaign that they've led that like students have been talking about by and large. You did get some traction on their higher education bill recently, but we're now in March. Like, what, we've had 7 months of term?
Yeah.
Virtually nothing.
Okay. And just finally on the fees issue, do you think the establishment of the Department of Higher and Further Education, do you think that it will bring us any step closer to the abolishment of fees that you're looking for?
I think the answer is actually certainly in that regard. It shows that like higher education is becoming a priority in the government, and it's something that like we would encourage, but want to see a lot go further.
Yeah. Another key issue for yourself is obviously housing. You've mentioned a key part of that is setting up a student forum. Could you speak how you think that would help student renters?
So how it would help in the immediate is that it would bring student renters together both on and off campus to talk about their issues and talk about how the union can go forward campaigning on them. There's a couple of other things that I'd like to do with this. This would be a very ad hoc organization at first, but I would like to see towards the second semester of next year having a constitutional referendum to formalize things like a student renters forum and put with it either a part-time paid officer for housing or possibly a part-time sabbatical officer for housing.
Do you think that's the importance of the issue warrants a new sabbatical officer?
I think for students, right, fees, housing, and student supports are their key issues. I don't see why it shouldn't be a priority for the students' union.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just thinking back to last year. I interviewed Leighton Gray for the same role you're going for now. And in that interview, we spent so long discussing the rent hikes that were taking place on campus. Is that something you think you'll still be working on and campaigning on, or is that another issue where the ship has sailed? The UCD Students' Union has campaigned as much as they could, and now it's moving on to other issues in housing for students.
We're definitely going to keep campaigning on opposing a rent hike. The wider issue isn't necessarily that accommodation in UCD is extortionate, because that's the case in Dublin more widely. It's that just from a lot of working class people, housing just in Dublin and in UCD specifically is inaccessible. So a bigger focus for me will probably be getting purpose-built affordable units in UCD. Now that can be done with a project through UCD and the government, but that would might be a concern that just for so many students, regardless of not if the rents go up, they're not accessing it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and you're mentioning these kind of more affordable rental units for students. How do you get to that stage when the direction from UCD's point of view in terms of building student accommodation has been so far in the other direction in terms of building accommodation that's probably less accessible for the majority of students?
Well, I think it has to come from a focus from top down, from government, that it is clear, and all these issues tie in together. That if we're calling for an end to fees, we're saying that the issue is that there are barriers to higher education. In the same sense, when we come to housing, there are issues, there are clear barriers that I know myself when I came to UCD, I was on the full SUSI grant, and the SUSI grant would have covered just about the accommodation in Blackrock that I stayed for the first year. But that was it. That was the entirety of my supports. Going forward, yeah, we need to see the government taking an active part to break down these barriers.
So you feel it'll need government intervention for a reversal in
100%,
UCD policy?
Yeah.
Okay. Another key issue that really stood out to me on your manifesto was anti-racism. What specifically made you make that a key campaign issue for you?
For me, I've always been very interested in anti-racism work. I remember the first protest I ever went to was actually in UCD, and it was on the migrant crisis in 2015. But for today, the issue is that we've seen spikes in racism in Ireland. We've seen with the rise of the far right that they're actively targeting migrants and people of color. So I think it's important that we actually raise these issues and try to create anti-racist networks both nationally and in UCD to combat these ideas.
Yeah, one of the points you raised under that topic was the decolonization of Irish academia in UCD. Could you speak more about how you think that we could bring that about?
So some of that work is already happening. There's been movements in UCD such as Decolonize the Academia at UCD, and Paulina, the Diversity Inclusion Officer, ran an event, I think about 3 weeks ago now, on decolonizing Irish academia. Where I would like to see it moving towards is that it becomes a more holistic approach. That right now it's very specialized in the humanities, but I'd like to see it branch out to other parts of the college.
So when you say branching out to other parts of the college, would you think the student union directly approaching academics across various disciplines in schools? Okay.
Yep, 100%.
Another issue for yourself was the environment, and a key part of that was the Stop CETA campaign. I was wondering how you feel putting UCD Students' Union at the forefront of the anti-CETA campaign. How do you think that would benefit students in UCD specifically?
So the core issue that relates UCD students to the CETA deal is the investor courts. And what we've seen happening in other countries, specifically Egypt is a good example, is that these investor courts have the ability to stop and rescind increases in the minimum wages. Now, students in Ireland are disproportionately on minimum wages. They need higher wages. If you're on the minimum wage, you're looking at between 60 and 18,000 a year that you'll be making if you're full time. That's just not enough to live in Dublin, never mind the rest of the country. If we end up in a situation that we sign up to this and we have our minimum wages, like I know there's I don't think they've given a concrete number, but certainly beyond 10.10 an hour. If that's being vetoed, that's going to disproportionately attack students, especially student workers.
Yeah, and if UCD Students' Union was to be at the fore, how do you envisage such a campaign going?
For a student-led campaign, right now the Stop CETA campaign is predominantly overwhelmingly students and young people. So it would be much of the same. Now, hopefully, towards the start of next semester, we won't be like in level 5 restrictions, that we can have in-person events, we can have protests, and it probably would make more of an impact in that kind of a situation. But for the moment, it is popularizing the idea, building slogans, and can relate to them.
Yeah. Another part of your environmental kind of piece on the manifesto was expanding the Great Donate. Could
Yeah.
you develop on that, of any ideas you might have to bring that about?
The big thing that's being decided at the moment is how to move it out of like residence itself. That space is an issue. So one of the ideas that's floating around is renting a container to do the Great Donate on campus every year. And I think that kind of thing will be the key issue. But it's also bringing the university on site that they will take some of the responsibility for the Great Donate. But makes UCD look good. You're seeing like large amounts of like pots, pans, anything that's recyclable going back into students and making on-campus life that's slightly bit more affordable. So yeah, we should see UCD taking over more of a role in this.
Yeah. So just moving on to the kind of engagement side of the role, you make reference to the town halls you'd like to run throughout the year. Could you just expand a bit more on how you think you'd like to run the town halls yourself?
So how the town halls have predominantly been done this year has been, I'm actually a big fan of them, that they've taken two broad formats, one of which is inviting in a set of speakers, talking for like 5 to 7 minutes, and then opening to the floor. The other one is just having an open floor discussion. That's what happened with the Smurfit students. And I think more of them is a fantastic idea. We can like have in-person events with students. So the only way we're going to engage with them on their own terms is bring into a room and like going, what are your issues?
Yeah. And do you feel, for me, I think the challenge there is getting the students into the room and getting that engagement in the first place. How would you hope to engage them to make the town halls the success that they really can be?
So the numbers that we would have got at the best of times this year would be 100, 150 people, which by and large is not bad compared to a normal year in student union. Like most student union events are not getting 150 people unless you're providing something for free. Going into this year, like active advertising, either in social media posts, sponsored posts. Another thing is that I put in the manifesto the idea of like a bi-semester email, sorry, not email, leaflet. Putting it on that and maybe having a QR code as well that will like directly link you to a register link for these town halls might be quite useful. But the main thing is keeping it topical, keeping it on issues that people wanted. Like one that I would have in mind straight away is a return to campus, a town hall. What people want to see about. Be very interested in.
Yeah, yeah. On the issue of the semester leaflet, you were saying, you mentioned that it would be distributed to renters on campus. Does that mean it is a leaflet only pertaining to renters on campus, or could this be something expanded to other students, or perhaps put also into an online format?
Oh, I'm certainly. It obviously would actually be put online. The key thing about why it's targeted towards student renters is they're just the most accessible for the student union to get at. We could literally mail them to. So, if we're still dealing with level 5 restrictions, which is always a possibility, they can just be mailed to students. If we're not dealing with that, we're in a much more encouraging setting whereby we could actually go around in teams and actually just knock on students them and talk about what their issues are and bring them to these events.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think that's a kind of way of the students' union accessing students that might be different from the flood of emails they're probably getting at the moment? Some from UCD
Yeah.
Students' Union, some from the university themselves. Is this something that can kind of stand out to students?
It's certainly a bit more tangible in the fact that you can put it in your hand. Like the student union email is not going anywhere. It is our main form of communication that goes out to every student, provides you with a list of events, list of activities that we're doing, and has a fairly high open rate. Like we do get statistics on who opens the emails, like how many people would open them, and they are still good numbers.
Yeah, yeah. Just moving on the engagement side, I think a really interesting point that you brought up was the thematic weeks that UCD Students' Union have ran, and your plans to kind of expand and do more of them. I was just wondering if you had any concerns that running multiple weeks of these could maybe, in fact, reduce engagement overall, and could dilute the importance of the individual weeks themselves.
Um, See, in large part, we do aspire every year to have events on a variety of issues. What this would do is that it will give it in a more coherent format, and that it won't be the student union will be dropping other things. It'll just be the more public facing events have a more thematic element to them, so that students they'll come to student union and go, okay, a good example actually be Green Week when we pick up Green Week again. That they will know that there is an environmental week happening and how to engage on that. That's not to say that we can't have environmental events throughout the year, but it means that for that particular week, we'll be able to advertise in a way that's very clear and very accessible for students that this is what's happening this week.
Yeah, so you mentioned there environmental. You also mentioned in your manifesto the success of the Shag Week. What other thematic weeks could you see happening, or would you like to suggest?
Oh, a big one for me would be Trade Union Week. Popularizing ideas around workers' rights, student workers' rights, and how coming out of university, what students will face in the workplace. That's a key issue that all students will, hopefully, if they get a stage to go to work, that they will face. Other ones would be Green Week. I'd like to see an anti-racism week. I'd like to see, I think in there I put international solidarity and just a number of other ones. Like we'll kind of make them up throughout the summer, and then have a plan to go in September.
Yeah, yeah. And just kind of on these weeks themselves and more broadly in the role of campaigns and engagement, how much do you feel the kind of restrictions COVID wise could affect your role and the campaigns and engagement that you'd hope to develop for it next year if you were elected?
Oh, massively. Like ideally, we'll be on campus. Well, probably a phased campus in semester one, and hopefully entirely back on campus in semester two. I think going into the summer, we're going to prep for an online year. No one likes to hear it, but we're going to prep for that so that we won't be surprised or shocked if it does come to pass. But ideally, we'll be having in-person events, and yeah.
Yeah, okay. Moving on from the manifesto, last year you ran for education officer. What do you feel you've learned in the last year that you're now bringing to what could be your role as campaigns and engagement?
That's fair. I think the big difference that has come between this year and last year is that I've come to enjoy the campaigning aspect of the SU, like getting elected as a cross rep, working on motions all the time, very outward facing campaigns, kind of motions. And I kind of want to give that my full time. So that's kind of why I'm running for campaigns and engagement.
So it's definitely a shift towards from the education kind of side of it to making perfect. And on that then, is for you the role of campaigns and engagement probably where you can make the most impact? Is that why you've run for that position?
I would say so. Like the key issues in my manifesto and the ones that I'm passionate about this year, as well as every year, is engagement and bring people into the union. Like I think the slogan I'm running under is building student power, like the emphasis on bring students into the union and letting them use the student as a vehicle for their own issues.
Yeah. Could you maybe just elaborate a little more on the slogan to bring about student power?
So the slogan, the kind of conception of it is that, well, look, students historically have been quite a militant bunch. They want to see their issues resolved. Work like going for building student power is emphasizing that that's exactly what I want to do. I want to see students take hold of their own lives, that like they've been locked away because of COVID for a year. I want to see them tackle issues on their three key issues, which is fees, housing, and student supports, so that the student union will become more, it'll be less that you go to the student union to deal with your issues, but rather you use the student union itself to vocalize and expand upon your issues so that you can actually resolve them.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have to ask you anyway, Darryl. Thanks very much for your time, and best luck with the rest of the campaign.